Now wait a friggin' minute. Didn't I say before I wasn't gonna make reviews any kind of regular thing? I know I said that. How in the hell did that EDF6 video get that many views? Well, it ain't gonna be routine, but fuck it. Here we go. Contra. Depending on how long you've been around, you might know it as a classic gone sour or a series of weird third-person shooter games that couldn't seem to pick a damned identity and stick with it. Me personally, I first encountered Contra in an arcade back before I even realized it was on the NES. As far as the original, its basic description was a pair of soldiers who looked like Arnold from Predator and Stallone from Rambo, fighting loads of soldiers, robots, and aliens till you reached a weird alien heart and then escaped the island via helicopter. Don't get me started on the bunch of European variations. I didn't own a Commodore 64 or other similar computer at the time, and I didn't live in Europe. Bottom line, the series in general was a cool but reasonably difficult series. Super C came along later on the NES, starring the same two guys. They were named Scorpion and Mad Dog initially for some weird fucking reason, but later got the names Bill Reiser and Lance Bean. More of the same, but with improvements. Good times. When the 16-bit era came along, we got a pair of fucking gems on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis in the forms of Contra 3D Alien Wars and Contra Hardcore, respectively. These were fucking awesome games if you were up to play more Contra with loads of improvements and some more creativity. There was even a separate Contra game on the original Game Boy, for fuck's sake. Now, in the following era, Konami seemed to get a little confused about where Contra was going. When the transition to 3D happened and the PS1 got big, Konami decided to produce two more Contra titles, but they didn't develop them. Appaloosa Interactive developed Contra Legacy of War in 1996, and then C, the Contra Adventure in 1998. I played them both, a lot, but saying they were good games might be a stretch. Legacy was a top-down mess and felt kinda generic, while C, the Contra Adventure was a 2.5D side-scroller done in polygonal graphics, which tried a lot harder but still felt like it missed the mark. Things got a little better in the early 2000s. Now, in late 2002, Team Kijirushi, which was a dev team within Konami, developed Contra Shattered Soldier, the Western release title. It was Shin Contra over there. I absolutely loved that game, and it introduced what would become one of my favorite characters, a combat android named Lucia who was playable alongside of Bill Reiser. It went back to classic side-scrolling style, albeit in a 2.5D, and while the plot was even weirder than before, it was a fucking blast. In late 2004, the same team, renamed Neo Kijirushi, developed Neo Contra, a sort of sequel. It went back to the original style from the first game of swapping between side-scrolling and top-down section, and it was even fucking weirder. I mean, one boss was a sentient dog piloting a giant robot. No joke. Man, it was still a lot of fucking fun. And then Konami went silent on Contra games again for about 3 years. Now I'm going to skim through this next bit some. In 2007, Contra 4 got released on the Nintendo DS by Wayforward, a developer I've got a reasonably good experience with. This was another fun and tough Contra title that seemed to kind of get how Contra games should work, and it got me a little hopeful that maybe the series might go somewhere again, even if it wasn't perfect. Yeah, I know, that game got developed for mobile too, but I don't fuck with that shit. Apparently, there was a digital-only release of a game called Contra Rebirth on the Nintendo Wii in 2009, but I missed out on it, and then they shut down the eShop, so yeah, I got nothing for that. In 2010, there was a game developed called Contra Evolution, but it was more mobile phone bullshit, so I never so much thought of it. In 2011, we got Hardcore Uprising on the Xbox 360 and the PS3. A kind of Contra spin-off which was damn good, and I wish it had gotten a physical release. I fucking refuse to acknowledge Contra 3D beyond saying it was a Japanese-only release in 2013 as part of Konami's obsession with turning every IP they had into pack-a-slot arcade machines. 6 fucking years went by before a game called Contra Rogue Corps came out, and it fucking sucked, sorry to say. The character designs were pretty awful save for Bill Reiser, and the gameplay was... I lack fucking words. It wasn't good. It made me very fucking unhappy. I was sure that Konami were just holding Contra down in the mud until it suffocated at this point. Fast forward to fucking 2024, and apart from a collection of the classic games, I was sure that Contra was pretty much dead. So I was pretty skeptical when I saw a demo pop up for a new game, Contra Operation Galuga. Still, the demo was free, so I figured I might as well try it. My first surprise was when the Wayforward logo popped up, followed by the classic Contra C logo and a blast of that familiar title music. Needless to say, I played the demo and I enjoyed it, which meant I had some hope for the game. Well, it's been released by now, and apart from the ongoing co-op episodes on my channel, I've beaten the story mode once and the arcade mode twice. I think that I can say I've gotten a solid fucking idea of what to say about this game by now, especially given some history with the series. I've got a few things to talk about, but let's start with a couple of mechanical changes, then the story mode. Arcade mode can be discussed later. So the first thing is, Wayforward added a couple of options. You can play it the classic way, where a single hit equals death, or you can choose to have an HP bar instead. There's a difficulty selection as well. You got 360-degree aiming by default, but apparently you can disable that. I did no such thing. They also added a feature called Overload, which will destroy your current weapon and grants you various temporary buffs, but to be honest, I never really used it. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but I tend to prefer hanging on to one of my favorite weapons. There's also a dash function that characters can use to get past certain shots or under certain obstacles. That can vary between characters. I'll get to characters later. As an aside, let's talk about difficulty and shit before I get into the story, since I've seen some folks bitching already. Look, Contra Operation Galuga ain't a perfect game, and it doesn't need to be. I'm just gonna say it. Yeah, maybe it could use some polish or some slight tweaks. What the fuck game couldn't? It's not as difficult as some of the classic Contra titles, but there's also settings to make it more difficult if you want. And one problem I've seen here, which is bound to fucking piss some people off, is that sometimes retro gamers are some of the most fucking difficult people to meet the expectations of. Not deny it if you want, but as a motherfucker who's been gaming since Atari consoles and the NES, I've seen it firsthand. There are some specific technical complaints I've seen mentioned on Switch and a PC, which, sorry guys, I can't speak for what I haven't experienced personally. Okay, but let me get to the fucking story already, though. Here's where I've seen some complaints that, well, they kind of confuse the fuck out of me. I've seen someone call it develop a fanfiction, which, yeah, okay. It's a friggin' reboot after years of trash fires, and the original Contra had next to no fucking story to speak of. Two guys shoot aliens on an island. Island explodes. Roll credits. Konami licensed the reboot and story, they oversaw Wayforward's work, and they approved the release. What the fuck else can I say about that? Anyway, what the fuck ever. Story mode begins with a meteor striking Galuga Island and activating something on the ground. An island a woman notices and seems pretty upset before she takes off. The game opening proper starts with Bill and Lance selectable as they land via helicopter on the island to investigate what their handler is suspected to be illegal development of gravity weapons. Now there's a mercenary force on the island called Red Falcon who've grabbed or killed the native population. Bill and Lance have been called in to get rid of them and secure these illegal weapons before they get a chance to use them. Of course, it ain't that simple, a fact which Lucia, who's an intel officer in this storyline, kind of suspects after your helicopter gets shot down by something which was registered as biological in nature. After discovering an underground facility and tunnels, the soldiers run into a Red Falcon lieutenant who gets blown up in a battle before they can question him. Suspicions arise again when that same lieutenant returns as a giant mutant who's got parts of his truck grafted onto his body. That's only more so after the guys kill a giant monster and then run to Ariana, the woman from the introduction scene. Now look, I'm not going to go over the entire story here. It's not a fucking masterpiece of writing, but I found it decent fun, and it does give a little background to the events on the island from the original. It introduces a couple of new characters who you can also play later, along with bringing Lucia back in at an earlier point, in a slightly different iteration from Shattered Soldier. It gives some basic setup for the alien wars during a comic-style cutscene later, and there's an alternate origin for certain characters which originally appeared in Contra Hardcore. Will those plot elements go anywhere or lead to another game? I don't fucking know, but the groundwork's there if Konami decides they want to use it. Next, I'm going to talk about characters, perks, and unlocks a little bit. There's been some complaints about these two, and I'm only here to give my opinion. Take it how you want it or ignore it, whatever works. First off, yeah, there's a perk system, but no, using it isn't required in any way. You can choose to play this game in the hardest difficulty with minimum lives and one-hit deaths without the ability to use the 360-degree aiming. Now, if you do check out the perks, there were a few. Extra HP, extra lives, character-specific minor abilities, the ability to retain your weapon when you die, blah, blah, blah. Even this can only be abused so much. Any character can only equip 2 perks at a time. The most you can do for HP is a +2, and certain characters can't even equip the +2 HP perk. If you're interested, the perks can be purchased as you progress and gain credits. More on that later. So let's talk characters now. You start with Bill and Lance, of course, but you'll unlock Ariana, a guy named Stanley Ironside, and Lucia as you advance in the story mode at no credits cost. That'll also make them available in the arcade mode, where you'll also find 2 variants of Probotector, who were the robot replacement characters from some of the European versions of the original games already waiting for you. Now, certain characters do work slightly differently. For example, Bill and Lance have their old double jump ability, and so does Ariana. Now, Lucia lacks the double jump ability, so instead she's got a grapple gun which can pull her up to higher spots as long as you can grapple onto him. Stanley also lacks the double jump, but he's got a grapple in his armor. His armor also allows him to hover over short distances. There are also certain weapons that will work completely fucking differently in the hands of some of these characters. The weapons work like they always did when the likes of Bill, Lance, or Ariana use them, but Stanley and Lucia, for example, convert the spread gun into a kind of a wide laser shot instead. When Stanley gets the laser, it becomes a ring-shaped projectile which fires slower but is easier to hit enemies with. Without spoiling everything for those interested, there are some other characters unlocked for arcade mode which have similar effects. So let's talk real quick about the perk shop itself and the unlocks. I've seen complaints about how this works, and to be honest, I'm kind of on the fucking fence here. I do agree that certain stuff like the speedrun mode should have just unlocked normally, maybe by beating the game or something. I don't have any comment on the mode itself because I don't really do the speedrun thing. Now, as for other stuff like perks or characters, I don't mind playing the game to build up credits to buy characters or abilities, but I would say the price is a bit steep for some of it. 8,000 credits to unlock one of the arcade characters is admittedly a bit fucking much, guys. Sure, I fucking did it because I've been playing the hell out of this game, but I also understand why this may annoy some folks. If nothing else, at least Konami didn't make them charge any actual money for any of this stuff. Now, there have been some other complaints I may as well address here because your personal opinions are bound to fucking vary. One is the graphical style, which I personally don't mind that much. It's 3D models done in 2.5D style, but for a game like this, I don't really mind it, and it's also probably a matter of what kind of time and money Wayforward had to work with, since this is a licensed property. It seems a lot of folks were calling for a purely sprite-based 2D game, or an animated-style game like Spider-Saws or Streets of Rage 4. That isn't what got produced. It functions well, and I had fun, so I'm gonna forgive the visuals for not being mind-blowing. Another complaint which I've addressed elsewhere in other videos was the soundtrack. Now, you're free to disagree, but I don't fucking hate it. It's partially because I don't hate orchestral music. I grew up mostly on orchestral music and fucking metal. Sure, it could have been more metal and guitar heavy, but I get the feeling the budget for this game wasn't exactly fucking huge, so they picked something and went with it. Some of the orchestral revamps of classic stage music don't hit quite as well as others, but they're functional, and if you beat the game, alternate soundtracks can become an option you can buy in the store. Okay, so the third issue I've seen brought up is the lack of online multiplayer. Now, I can't explain this decision, so don't ask me to. There could be any number of fucking reasons, but I don't know them. Now, while I much prefer to play locally, which this game allows, the complete lack of an online option does puzzle me a bit. I can't excuse that exclusion entirely, so I did feel the need to mention it here. The last complaint is one I'm going to address in two parts. One's the price, and the second is a matter of its availability. As of right now, this game costs around $40 before tax in the States. That's digital, and the cost is the same across the Xbox, Steam, and PlayStation Store currently. I checked. Now, I hate to be that guy, but while corporate greed is a very real fucking problem, so's inflation. You can blame it on Konami, or you can blame things on the fact that money just ain't worth as much as it was, but everything's more expensive now. When it comes to this, I can't speak for anybody's budget or preferences. You gotta think with your own wallet. It does seem a bit steep, but personally I love Contra, and I've enjoyed most Wayforward games, so I went ahead and bought it, and I've had fucking fun with it. At worst, maybe you want to wait for a sale. The bigger elephant in the fucking room is the availability issue. Now, unless you happen to catch this thing on its release back in limited run games, there doesn't seem to be any physical edition of this game available. This is unfortunately kind of a common truth with a lot of Wayforward games. They're a small studio and they seem to lack a dedicated publisher for physical releases of the games. Now, I don't know. Either LRG gave them a serious deal, or they couldn't afford anyone else. I don't know. Regardless of the reason, there's the fact. It may not mean much to some, but for anyone who prefers physical media, this could mean skimming eBay in a few months if you want a disc copy of it. Now, much like with EDF6, I personally had a lot of fun with this game. But that may not be true for everyone. As someone who loved Contra and hated what had kind of become of it over time, this game felt like a step in the right direction for me. I enjoyed the new options and play it setting up a plot for a new timeline, but some classic enthusiasts may find these things not to their fucking liking at all. The graphics are functional and look reasonable to me, but some would prefer the pixel art or animated styles of other Wayforward games. Now, apart from the price and a few small decisions I don't quite get, if you can deal with it being digital and aren't going to stress over Contra perfection, you could have a lot of fun with this game. It's just going to be a matter of the price, I think. That's all I got, folks. I hope this was useful, or at the very least, entertaining. See you later.